Have you ever noticed how seasons of lack have a way of revealing what we truly trust? When resources shrink, when options disappear, and when the future feels uncertain, something inside us is tested. Famine has a voice. It tells us to panic, to run, to rely on what looks safe instead of what is right. That is why the story of Isaac in Genesis 26 speaks so powerfully to every generation. It asks a simple but uncomfortable question. What do you do when obedience feels risky and faith seems unreasonable? The hook of this story is not that Isaac became wealthy. It is that he chose to listen to God when everything around him suggested a different direction. In a time when survival depended on strategy, Isaac's greatest strength was trust. The famine that struck the land during Isaac's lifetime was not a minor inconvenience. In an agricultural society, famine meant threat to life itself. Crops failed, water sources dried up, and people were forced to migrate in search of food. Isaac had seen this before through the stories of his father Abraham, who once went down to Egypt during a famine. Naturally, Isaac considered doing the same. Egypt represented security, resources, and human wisdom. It was the obvious solution. Yet God's instruction to Isaac went directly against what seemed logical. God told him not to go to Egypt, but to remain in the land he would show him. This moment becomes the foundation of the entire story. Isaac's future was shaped not by the famine, but by his response to God's voice. Obedience here was not comfortable or convenient. It was costly and uncertain. Still, Isaac stayed. What makes this decision so meaningful is that obedience came before any visible reward. Isaac did not receive a guarantee of immediate prosperity. He received a promise that God would be with him and bless him because of the covenant made with Abraham. This teaches an important spiritual truth. Faith often requires movement before evidence. Isaac trusted the word of God more than the condition of the land. Staying did not eliminate the famine. It changed how Isaac lived within it. Many people want God's blessing without God's instruction, but Isaac shows that divine provision flows from alignment with God's will. His choice to remain was an act of surrender, placing his security not in geography or resources, but in God's faithfulness. As Isaac settled in Gerar, he did something that looked foolish under the circumstances. He planted crops. In a season where scarcity ruled, planting required courage. Farming in famine defied common sense. It meant investing what little seed one had into dry ground, trusting that something would grow. Yet this is where faith moves from belief to action. Isaac did not just wait passively for God to intervene. He acted in obedience while trusting God for the outcome. The Bible records that Isaac reaped 100-fold that same year because the Lord blessed him. This outcome was not the result of superior farming techniques or favorable weather. It was the result of divine blessing. The land did not change. The source of increase was God himself. This moment reveals a profound lesson about faith. Faith is not denial of reality. It is confidence in God despite reality. Isaac acknowledged the famine, but refused to let it dictate his obedience. He did what God instructed him to do, and trusted God to bring the increase. Many people wait for conditions to improve before stepping out in faith, but Isaac shows that obedience does not wait for ideal circumstances. Often, God's blessing is released not when situations become easier, but when faith becomes stronger. As Isaac prospered, his success became visible to others. His flocks multiplied, his wealth increased, and his influence grew. Prosperity, however, brought new challenges. The people around him became envious. The Philistines, who lived in the land, began to feel threatened by Isaac's growth. Envy has a way of distorting perspective. Instead of celebrating blessing, it seeks to limit it. The Philistines responded by stopping up the wells that Abraham had dug. Wells were not just property, they were survival. Blocking them was an aggressive act, meant to weaken Isaac and force him to leave. Isaac's response to this hostility is one of the most striking aspects of the story. He did not retaliate. He did not fight for his rights or assert his power. Instead, he moved and dug another well. When that well was contested, he moved again. This pattern repeated itself. Each time Isaac encountered opposition, he chose peace over conflict. This was not weakness. It was trust. Isaac believed that God was his defender and provider. He did not need to fight for what God had promised. He allowed God to handle what human strength could not resolve. Walking away from conflict requires deep faith. It means trusting that God can restore what others try to take away. Isaac's willingness to move on showed that his confidence was not in wells, land or possessions, but in God's provision. Each blocked well could have been seen as failure, but Isaac treated them as temporary obstacles, not final defeats. He kept moving forward, continuing to dig, continuing to believe. His perseverance was quiet, steady, and rooted in faith rather than pride. Eventually, Isaac dug a well that no one contested. He named it Rehoboth, meaning room, declaring that the Lord had made space for him to flourish. This moment is significant because it shows the reward of perseverance. God did not just restore what Isaac lost. He gave him peace and stability. Isaac's journey teaches that not every battle is meant to be fought. Some victories come through endurance, patience, and trust in God's timing. By refusing to engage in constant conflict, Isaac preserved his heart and allowed God to establish him in peace. After these events, God appeared to Isaac again, reaffirming his promise. God reminded him that he was the God of Abraham and that Isaac was walking in the path of covenant faithfulness. This divine encounter came after obedience, perseverance, and trust. It was a confirmation that Isaac's choices had not gone unnoticed. God's promises are not abstract. They are personal and enduring. Isaac responded by building an altar and worshiping God. This act of worship was not incidental. It revealed Isaac's understanding that every blessing he had experienced came from God. Worship anchored Isaac's success. It kept his heart aligned with God and protected him from pride. Instead of crediting himself for his prosperity, Isaac acknowledged God as the source. Building an altar in that moment was a declaration of gratitude and dependence. It showed that Isaac's relationship with God was not transactional but relational. He did not serve God only for blessings. He honored God because of who he was. The story of Isaac in Genesis 26 is not a promise that faith will eliminate hardship. Isaac still faced famine, opposition, and displacement. What changed was not the absence of challenges, but the presence of God. Faith did not remove difficulty. It transformed Isaac's response to it. His life demonstrates that God's blessing is not limited by external conditions. Prosperity, in the biblical sense, is not merely material wealth, but living under God's favor and guidance. This account speaks to anyone navigating uncertainty. It reminds us that obedience may lead us into uncomfortable places, but God's faithfulness sustains us there. Trusting God sometimes means staying when leaving seems safer. Planting when waiting feels wiser, and walking away when fighting seems justified. Isaac's life shows that God honors quiet faith, patient endurance, and humble obedience. Ultimately, Isaac's strategy was not clever planning or human wisdom. It was listening to God, acting in faith, choosing peace, and honoring God in every season. The famine did not define Isaac's future. His faith did, and that same principle remains true today. When obedience guides our steps and trust anchors our hearts, God is able to bring growth even in the driest seasons.